Mr. Chairman and members, you are live.
Okay, committee, we've been tasked with kind of having a peek at the veterans property tax exemption law in order to determine if there's something we can do to essentially save the state a little money and help balance our budget. We've got a copy of a draft bill. We've got a report that kind of breaks down the some of the options. And I think, you know, what is striking is if you look on the report on page 3, our annual expenditures for this is almost $6 million a year that we're paying out for benefits for our, so $12 million a year biennially. That to me is kind of remarkable, but that it's that much, and it seems to be ever growing. So we're adding more veterans than we're losing over time, I presume. And my guess is that that's not going to change in the near future, but I don't know the answer to that. So what I want to do is just open it up to comments and suggestions from the body. The simplest thing to do is just change modify the number, the $3,000 a month. But we also talked about adding in perhaps a cap based upon income, changing the residency or putting a cap on the total amounts paid. So with regards to those alternatives that were explained to us, what's the committee's pleasure?
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yep.
So I think we have a chance here, because as I went through and read the statutes here in 3913 this morning, I think kind of what has happened is when this statute was put in place, they kind of established a policy, and then the funding was according to the policy. You know, if you were a veteran of the Spanish-American War, World War I, or any, they listed these, you could qualify for this amount, and I think it not to exceed $800. And then 2007 or whenever it was, you know, it changed, and we started doing an annual thing, and it was really then become based on just how much money we had available, and has kind of gone since then. And I think that we've been addressing a lot of that as this committee has over the last couple of years, and trying to reestablish policy. And so it would be my preference as we look at this, not to just reduce the amount, but to put in the criteria that says, this is our policy. We think that veterans are important, and there's a criteria that you have to do. I'm in favor of saying that you have to be a resident of the state for a period of time, you know, and do some of those things, so that in the future, when we're not here, and they look at this and they look at the amounts being paid there's some connection between what is being paid and the policy that governs it.
I can understand that, but essentially you want to rewrite the statute?
No, I don't think we have to. I think you go in there and you look at that 3913-105B and A, and you look at that historic language, and then I think we just have to come down there, and as you read down into that where they've made changes, they've taken down some of the sideboards that I think are policy, that you have to be a resident for so long, that is it open to a widow, or is it open to any spouse? And I think that we just need to go back and look at that and say, you know, and the 3 years kind of comes up to that earlier point. And then what's the maximum amount? At one time there was a maximum amount, I think, and based on based on income. I think that you used a personal experience of your father being a veteran, and you're saying, why is he getting this? And I think that he would smile and say, yeah, it's a good question, but I do. And and so I think that those are policies. We want to be generous to our veterans and show our appreciation, but I think they understand that there's some limits to what allows them to qualify. That's my opinion. The committee members may feel differently about that.
Okay, anybody else?
I like the idea of putting some limiting factors on there also. The means testing is one that does really appeal to me. I'm not sure, Bob, how much it would take to do that, but I do like the means testing idea. I'm not sure survivors should get this. If they do, and I guess the residency thing is another one that would be of interest to me, so that someone doesn't move here to take advantage of that. Not that would happen, but.
So I think there's still a 3-year limit, isn't there?
It's up to $2,500 a year. Brian can maybe tell us that, but.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, the current statute in 39-13-105 for surviving spouses is expressly listed in statute. That is 3 years. And then Department of Revenue rules for just veterans in general is 3 years as well.
So again, they can only get it. Explain that to me again, would you please, Brian? They can get it for 3 years maximum, or tell me what that was again, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, a veteran or surviving spouse has to reside in Wyoming for 3 years before qualifying for the exemption. It is not a limit on you can only claim the exemption for 3 years.
So is there a difference if I grew up in Lander and then spent a military career traveling around the world and moved back to Lander, then or is that through that process of saying where your home is on, there's a military form? But I'm just trying to understand if I always had the intent of moving back home, then when I do move back home, do I have to be here for 3 years, or is that the way that works?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I'll need to double check the rule on that point. I do know, at least for the surviving spouses, a specific language that is used is the spouse has been a resident of Wyoming for at least 3 years at the time the spouse claims the exemption. I believe the rule states similarly, but I can pull that up and check real quick.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So if we look on page 3 and 4, the staff has already implemented some ideas that we've thrown around here.
Right.
But I'm a little bit, if we choose one of these, like for example, a maximum annual salary or something like that, I'm at a loss to know what kind of an impact that particular one is going to have to the whole fund. It's almost like we need Brian to, maybe we need to give him some criteria and let him go back to the drawing board and report back to us what effect that's really going to have on the number of people that are participating.
Well, I've got my response to that particular one is it really doesn't matter, because they've got a means test in there, but my suggestion is we just put a number, and you just use if their net income is over $50,000 a year, they shouldn't get it. I mean, the purpose is for folks in need, theoretically, more than anything else. So if we just pick a number and we do that, I also think that we got to be careful, because if we tinker too much, we'll be wasting our time because the bill will die. So my thought was at this point we ought to implement something comparable to the step 2, step 3 cuts, because that's why we're doing it. And when pick that number, and so if we're given 6 million a year, if we cut that by 20%, so it'll go to roughly what, 4.5 million a year. And then we just figure out what that turns into based upon, reduce the 3,000 to whatever that number is, how we get to it. And that way we've got an easy description, we've got an easy thing, but we can also throw in, and we could probably throw in no one over 50,000 a year to that extent. And I think that's probably all we can do without getting too complicated and spending way too much time discussing exactly what and why, and allowing more arrows in the quiver of everybody who's going to attack this.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I would so then help me with your assessment of this, because I kind of read one thing and then I hear you say another. So is it your opinion that this tax exemption is in place to help veterans who are in need, or do you think that this was put in place as an expression of appreciation to those who are in the military service for their service?
Well, I think it's both.
Well, and I think that that's important as we contemplate. Again, that's kind of where I'm getting at on the policy. It just,
yeah, okay, I'm with you then. Yeah.
What is the purpose of this? So,
well, and we can then, in the beginning of it, we could add language to kind of set what the policy is and why, and
or even if we have it in our own mind, what the rationale behind our thinking was for when we explain it, I think would even suffice. I just want to make sure I'm on the same page as you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that moving from 3,000 down to 2,550 is really the known number that we can tell if we're moving the budget from 6 million to 4 million or whatever, because we know the number of current claimants and we know how that would be affected. To the staff note and really to Representative Simpson's comment, because so much of this is done at the county level, they don't necessarily track income and all of that information that we're discussing. And so it would be difficult for us, because they haven't been asked to track it. It would be difficult for us to know what those kind of cost savings would be. I agree with your point of picking a few of these parameters to put in place so that it's not just a wide open thank you to all of our veterans. I think I agree with Representative Larson. Probably the one that I like the most is 3 years immediately preceding their requesting the rebate, you might say, just to make sure somebody doesn't grow up here and at the age of it. So they have 18 years of residency because they were born here and go through high school, and then move away for the next 35 years and come back and use and claim it on day one because they lived here from 0 to 18. I think as long as the policy is already in place to make sure that it's 3 years immediately preceding the request for the rebate, that's probably the one that hits home most for me and is easiest to implement. So that's my 2 cents, committee.
Yeah, and I think there's a form that you have to fill out before the 1st of May. And in that form, if you put down that your joint income in your household income, my question is it individual or a joint household income if you're a couple. If it's over 50,000, then or pick a number, 75,000, that they shouldn't, they don't qualify. But I think that'd be an easy thing to do.
And Mr. Chairman, I agree with that. I think we could make it the median household income. If you're above median household income for your family size, then you do not get the exemption. If you're below median family income, you do.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way it's drafted.
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
First of all, sorry I was late, but between sitting with you guys and doing this and getting my vaccine, it was
kind of an easy choice. I talked to my assessor.
Whoa.
She's very comfortable with doing median home value because that's data that they have in their office essentially. I don't think she'd have a problem with the residency. She was not real happy with getting into income. And part of it is because even if you have a form where they put it down, as we know, there's a certain, at some level, you've got to be reviewing that. You can't just take a form and go, yeah, that's right. The other point on home value, and it would apply to income too, is some counties have slightly different home values. So there's got to be some mechanism. And I suggested median home value to her, could be done by county, and she thought that would be easy. So that's my 2 cents. You want
Okay.
5 cents?
Mark, what's your thoughts?
So I agree, and I was thinking about the median, and now that I look at it, now that I've had a chance to look at it, I do like that. And I agree with you, Bob. If we just pick, I like the number, maybe the income, and maybe the residency, and leave it at that.
Well, do we want to plug things? I mean, what do you want to do for our next steps?
So I would like to plug some things in. I have a question that kind of goes along that line, Mr. Chairman, and that's on page 3, where
Of the draft bill?
15 has not resided or maintained a residency in Wyoming for, and then the blank, but I thought I heard from Brian that was in statute, that we had something in statute. Is he saying that it's there in statute and we have the ability to change it? Is
It's
that
in statute for the widow.
just the widow?
I think so.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, it's in statute for the surviving spouse. It is in rule for the veteran.
Oh, that's where I missed you. That's where I missed you.
So is the rule, I'm interested in how they could have a rule that says that when that's really outside the, what's in the statute. But, so we probably ought to stick it in the statute because that could be challenged, I think, on whether or not they can set that rule.
So, Mr. Chairman, should we set it at 3 years, or Brian, is it 3 years in rule?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, it is 3 years.
So we could plug 3 years in there. And then Brian, my next question is, how do we make sure that it's 3 years immediately preceding the request for the rebate?
So what it currently says is at least 3 years at the time the spouse claims the exemption has been a resident for
So
at least 3 years.
How do we make sure that doesn't refer to that when they were 0 to 18 years old and then come back 40 years later?
Well, you can put in the word preceding 3 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, one way to do that would just be to say something to the effect of, must be a resident of Wyoming for at least 3 consecutive years immediately preceding the time of claiming the exemption. And I think that would address your concern.
Do you want a motion for that, Mr. Chairman, or are we just doing this informally at this time?
Yeah, I think let's just list what we're going to do, and then we'll have a draft bill done, and then Lloyd and I can work on the draft, and we'll bring it back to everybody.
Well, I would make that as a notion. Do use the language that Brian just discussed of 3 years immediately preceding, resident of Wyoming immediately preceding the request, et cetera, as summarized.
Let's talk about the if we want to put a cap on salary on whatever their income is. Board says no. What else we got?
I liked Andy's idea. After I thought about it, I thought that's something that the county clerk's going to know, because that assessed value of the home is in their possession already, and there's no reason, it's not difficult to follow up. And then we set it at median value for the county or whatever at that point, but it's an easier number to quantify. A new thought to ponder, and I like the way Andy approached it.
And I'll add, I was surprised, my assessor said that per veteran, I think she said it's about $175 per. So we're not dealing with the aggregate number seems large at 4 million a biennium or something like that, is my recollection. But on an individual basis, they're really not getting that much of a break. So I think we don't want to make it overly complicated, because then the administrative effort exceeds the revenue change.
Yeah, it's roughly, on the ad valorem, it's 4.3 million annually. So it's 8.6 biennially. And so I wonder if she was confusing the vehicle one versus the home.
No,
Well, you have to remember, all it is so if your home's assessed at $10,000 in tax value, you get to take the $3,000 off that and just pay the difference.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's why it's
It's
not $3,000 of rebate, you might say. It is just
right.
that off of the assessed value.
And there's roughly 32,000 applicants.
Right, so that's how the number works, yeah.
So Mr. Chairman, I like Andy's idea because it's administratively simpler. That is, you make the cutoff some percentage of assessed valuation. That is, if you're living in a $500,000 home in most parts of the state, then you're not eligible. Now, maybe in Teton County, that might just be a 1,000 square foot condominium.
But if I may say, that's why each county has the data on median home value.
Yeah.
So, and it doesn't have to be median, but a percentage, either 1.5 times median, but that way it's equitable.
Okay, well, let's do that. We'll have that put in. And then what about, who else, yay or nay on whether we have an income cap? Okay, that's gonna die, that'll die.
Yeah,
What
I
about-
changed my mind.
What about vehicles? Because vehicles is also significant. That's roughly 2.6 million biannually. What are our options on the vehicles? I mean, how, Brian?
First thought, Bob, is do we want to whack the vets twice in the same bill? I mean, because
Yeah, I agree. I think that may be a bridge too far. People love their cars.
and they love their
The one thing we could do is limit to 1 car per family. Because now it's 1 car per individual or senior so if there's 2 of you, you get it for both your cars.
Mr. Chairman, what kind of a break are we giving them on vehicles right now?
Brian, how did they calculate? Is it?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not entirely sure on the calculation piece of it, but what the current statute says for the motor vehicles is that they can claim unused exemptions against the registration fees.
So does that mean then if I had property tax exemption and I didn't get all of that used up, that I could use the remainder of it in a vehicle exemption? Is that how I'm understanding that, Brian?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that appears to be how the statute reads. I'm not 100% sure. I think Mr. Swank could probably better explain how that works in practice.
Go ahead, Michael.
Mr. Chairman, I believe Brian has it generally correct. The issue is that my understanding is that the budget for the state treasurer's office covers both exemptions. So there are some veterans that don't own real property and they'll take their entire exemption off of their car. but they're still limited to the $3,000 per year, regardless of which property they use.
Interesting. So that means you can, well, depending on the value, what we could do on that is limit the value of the car.
Yeah, but how many of them are gonna have I mean,
Well, that's how you put a cap on it, basically. So it's for the first $30,000 or whatever, $25,000 of the vehicle. And so, but anyway, all those everyone that wants to tinker with the vehicle thing, raise their hand. Well, that solves it. Yeah, one, two.
I'm willing to tinker with it at least, and then let's see what it looks like when we can look at the whole bill. Because is that
So what about the idea of limiting it based upon the value of the, because it's just your renewal of your license plates each time. And, you know, I'm just thinking about it. My guess is that the folks that don't have a home, they'll almost always use all of it.
and
Because,
the way that goes with the house, because the house we're reducing the assessed value by 3,000 or whatever it's going to be. So that actually would be consistent if we did it that way.
well, if we did it for the first $15,000 of the value of the car, say, and so nothing above that, so it's a set amount, and whatever that is on your license fee, so on the valuation of your vehicle, that would be a simple way to do it.
And then give them 2 cars so the spouse can get it too.
So then are you saying, Mr. Chairman, if you had a $30,000 value, they can, based on a percentage of that valuation up to that?
Yeah.
Kind of like we are with real property.
Yeah, exactly. And then the only issue is picking the value.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
Brian, is there a 3-year residency requirement on the vehicles as well? I'm trying to track that through and struggling there. I don't have all the info in front of me.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Representative Walters, you know, the statutes that I've looked at, I'm not sure it's entirely clear, at least in Title 31, in the registration statutes, there's no express mention of residency. There is a mention in this 3913-105G that you can use the fees toward the motor vehicle registration, or you can use the exemption toward the motor vehicle registration. You know, given that it's in that section, you know, it's unclear whether that residency requirement would apply equally to applying it to the registration versus the property tax.
So I think there's one more we could do, is put a 3-year residency just like the home on that.
I think we'll concur with that. Don, you got input?
Mr. Chairman, I had 2 quick points. The first is, when you reduce on page 2 the value of that exemption, that 3,000 roughly is the equivalent of about $200 of actual tax benefit, assuming a 68 mil average statewide. 68 mils times 3,000 is $200. And any unused portion of that can go towards the motor vehicles. So you've already reduced the maximum from $200 to roughly $175, which happens to be about the typical individual. So that also would apply to motor vehicles, as I understand, because you've reduced the $3,000. In addition, just for your consideration, there are about 4 or 5 folks in the waiting room who actually administer this, if you wanted to bring any of them in. I see one of them has their hand raised.
Yeah, bring them in, whoever wants to come in. Is this Dixie?
Yes, sorry, I had to unmute, Chairman. This is Dixie Huxtable. Can you hear me now?
We can.
All right, thank you. My name is Dixie Huxtable. I'm with Converse County Assessor, and I would be happy to visit with you a little bit about how this process is actually working currently. So first and foremost, there is a 3-year requirement in statutes now. It's at the very beginning of the statute 3913-105A, which requires them to be a bona fide Wyoming resident for at least 3 years prior to filing for a claim for the exemption. And that's the veteran, and it goes on into the spouse. So that is already in statute and already being administered. Currently, the $3,000 of exemption is assessed value, and they can use it on their residence or on their vehicle. Bearing in mind, residence also includes personal property, which could be a mobile home. So when you're talking valuations, you have everything from a mobile home to a multi-million-dollar house that could be involved. The $3,000 can be used on their house, their personal property, or their vehicle in a total aggregate amount of $3,000. If they're using that $3,000 assessed value on their residence, real property, or personal property, it's based on the mill levy. The 68 mills that you guys were talking about as an average is a good example. On a vehicle, it's at 30 mills. So if they use the full $3,000 exemption on a vehicle and only the vehicle, it translates to $90 of tax credit against their registration. Now I'm talking about I'm not talking about disability or any of the separate license plates exemptions that are done through the treasurers. I'm just talking about the part that the assessors administer. They come in, they register with us, they meet the qualifications, they go into the database, and then they can use that exemption annually on either their vehicle or their house. They have to notify us by the 4th Monday in May if they want it on their residence or personal property. So I hope that gives a little bit of clarity.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Lloyd.
So Dixie, this Representative Larson, if you could help me, I was just looking at your reference up there in 3913-105A, where you say that it has the serviceman already listed as a 3-year exemption. And I see that for the Indian Wars, the Spanish-American War, and in that bunch, the Second World War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, a surviving spouse, somebody that has been awarded forces of exemplary medal, but that's kind of limited to those on that 3-year exemption. Where do the rest of them fall in under that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, that covers all the veterans that are eligible. So if they don't meet that criteria for one of those service times and or medals earned, they don't qualify for the veterans exemption. So basically that covers them all. So not all veterans are granted this. They have to be what has been referred to as a combat vet based on these dates and medals that they've earned. So those medals list was coordinated with the VA, and I think there's probably somebody on this meeting that could explain those, but not every veteran is qualified for an exemption. They have to meet one of those criteria and been a bona fide resident for 3 years.
Well, you certainly have been enlightening. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was
Dick,
taking it the other way.
so if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Dixie, this is Representative Schwartz. I'm looking at Romanet of little VI. That covers all the other wars though, correct? It's who served in the military service and got a particular medal in any armed conflict, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, that is correct. That part of the statute covers all of the rest of them that were not in those certain time periods.
But, okay, and if I may, Mr. Chair, but so in the first, the ones that we specify, they don't have to have actually been in combat, just been in the service. And then in later wars, they will have to show they were, well, it's hard to tell. Do you differentiate? Is it just being in the service in that time periods?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Schwartz, yes, we do differentiate. If their service based on their documents they provide us is during a specific time period, then they can qualify just by the time period based on the statutes. If they don't fall within the service dates provided, then we look at those medals to see if the medals will qualify them, and that's where the combat vet language sort of comes into play.
Thank you. That's what I thought.
You're welcome.
It's nice to see you.
You too, sir.
What does or other authorized service mean?
Mr. Chairman, there is a list of other medals that have been included in this list that would grant them eligibility. That is a list that's compiled with the VA and the Department of Revenue. I can certainly get you that list. I don't know it off the top of my head, but there is a list of probably 10 to 15 specific medals and service dates that would qualify them for this veteran exemption.
So it's just interesting because in I guess the number is, well, it's remained fairly consistent over the last 4 years. Do we know what's happened over the last 20 years in terms of the number of applicants?
Mr. Chairman, I don't have those numbers specifically in front of me. I'm certain that we can get most of that information through the Department of Revenue. They created a database several years ago that we are now required to put all the veterans into. Instead of every county managing their own independently, it's now into a statewide database. So the Department of Revenue would have that information. I did ask them to send it to me for 2020, and I'm sure you already have that data. And speaking just of the veterans exemptions for property tax purposes, there was about 21,680 claims granted during 2020.
Yeah, so that's 700 more than 2019.
And so, Mr. Chairman, yes, even in my county, we have seen an increase with some of the most recent wars across the country, across the waters. We have picked up some additional veterans. Of course, we've lost a few that don't meet those earlier dates, but I can't give you the exact numbers of the increase, but I do know it has increased every year in my county.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Michael.
Mr. Chairman, I had two quick responses. In terms of the other conflicts, the Management Audit Committee looked at this several years ago, and we did a research project on it. The other wars, the other conflicts are such things as like the Afghanistan Expeditionary Medal, those types of things for more recent conflicts. And in terms of the scale of the number of claimants in the, I don't know if you have it pulled up for you. We did a summary memo in November, and it's in the JAC SharePoint pre-session packet materials. And then the very last page, there's a graph that shows more or less since the last probably about 6 to 8 years, number of claimants has been fairly level, within a few hundred up or down.
Yeah, since 2012.
Right, and then the increase really occurred in 2007 when the cap on benefits was lifted and the older veterans were able to reclaim again after they had met the prior $800 benefit cap. So that's kind of the history of this program in the last 15, 20 years.
So what's the committee's thoughts on putting a cap on benefits?
Lifetime benefits, right?
They are now. It was 800.
Well, that's what I mean, but there'd be a cap. There was 800 established in 1955 and then ended. I like that idea. I think that was the original policy. You make that, what do you make that?
So yeah, I think the statute was enacted in 1998.
So we just do cost of living and adjust it?
No.
How would you, I mean, that would be a fairly complicated calculation. You have cost of living. But the problem is, how do we cap it with existing, we'd have to start the cap now, basically, in order to be fair. And so with the impact of the cap wouldn't happen, and it'd take about 10 years for it to kick in, probably. But ultimately, it's probably not a bad idea. I mean, if you make it $1,000, then I mean, to me, there's a logic to it.
Mr. Chairman, would those people that have already been on it for 10 years that if they've already exceeded the cap, would they immediately be bumped off?
No, what I'm saying is really to make it fair with people, you just start the cap going forward. So everyone starts at 0.
So if you made it at 2,000 and the average is 175 a year approximately, or if we left it at the $3,000 threshold, it's 200, that gives you 10 years of the benefit. So yeah, that would be one way to justify setting it at a 2,000 lifetime cap. Rounding some numbers in there.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Chairman, it was first established in 1955. That's where we got the $800 maximum lifetime benefit. That was removed in 2007. That's on page 6 of that November handout.
I'm just looking at the history in the statute book, in the green books.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just probably moving back to the very first exemption there of $2,500 instead of $3,000, and maybe that's as far as we dare go.
And the time frame?
Yeah, reconsidering the time frame and making it so it's fair for everybody, because some obviously are having to wait for 3 years and others aren't.
And that saves, once it's kicked in, what, roughly 16%?
Mr. Chairman, it is 15%, which covers you for this biennium. We have some concern that the budget reduction of the governor's biennializes. So the cut to the state treasurer's office becomes 20% in 23-24, which would be $2,400 rather than the $2,550.
So why don't we just go to $2,400 or cut it, put it in the middle, go to $2,500?
Based on today's discussions about randomly selecting numbers, I think like the 2,400 sounds a little cleaner to me rather than rounding it up to an even number.
Well, and it actually, I think you're right, because if we go to 24 down to 24, then we accommodate the biennialization of the cuts, right, Don? And that's what we want to do. So I would suggest we just go to 2,400. Lloyd, if you want to put in some language in there that talks about purpose, and then the other things that we talked about in terms of 3-year and everything else, and tying in the 3-year to the vehicle as well, just so that it's consistent. Brian, anything else?
Mr. Chairman, if I may, after the clarification I got from Dixie there, I think the policy is kind of in place. They outline it. We just need to put a couple of little tweaks there. So I think we're good. We just adjust the amount and change that 3-year requirement. I think I'm fine.
Mr. Chairman,
well, I think we're about done then. We've got a draft bill.
I think we're there, but could I ask Dixie another question? I want to make sure so the people that fought in the Spanish-American War, they have the 3-year delay, but the people who fought in Afghanistan, do they have the delay according to your policy?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Simpson, yes, they do. They are still required to meet the 3-year bona fide residency qualification. All veterans that apply through the assessor's office have to meet that 3-year qualification, okay, including the spouses. Mm-hmm.
So, Mr. Chairman, we may not have to fuss with that 3-year thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're just making the statute read consistently, but I think you're right. I mean, that's how it's being applied. And it makes our job easier.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, looking at the statute, I don't think there's a need to, I don't think that piece needs changes. Now, Mr. Chairman, the motor vehicle could use maybe added clarity, but certainly that's a decision for the committee.
Yeah, I don't know if it's worth it. And then we have to have two statutes.
Yeah.
So, Tim, since I see you got some comments? Welcome. Good to see you.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. And to the representatives, I really appreciate where I appreciate it here in the discussion, and I appreciate where you've gotten to. My one biggest concern when I saw this was that it's relatively complex, what was proposed. And I think when we talked about it last fall, or whenever that was, that the simpler, the better. And I think that veterans will fully appreciate the times that we're in, and that if that overall amount has to come down to help us as a state, there's not going to be any problem there at all.
Right, we appreciate it. Okay. Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, in the list of those wars, do we need to include the folks that fought in the Civil War?
That's just representative error.
I think I got years on Danny.
Go ahead, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks, Tim. It's great to see you. Thanks for your comments. So on the previous, the maximum that we have now, is that kept track of by the Department of Revenue? Is that how that works?
There are no maximums right now.
Well, I'm just reading in the memo. It says the previous maximum total benefit provided in the section was
Well,
800
yeah,
bucks.
they must have.
Okay. Just curious, because there'll be
Right,
some
Dixie?
work there, right?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Kinner, yes, it was being tracked prior to the statewide veterans database. Every county kept track of it separately. Once we went into the database, that database is now keeping track, but I would hazard a guess that it's not complete. You would have some existing veterans that may or may not have their total claims in there. So to try to put a maximum credit of lifetime would be a little rough, because I don't think we have access to all that prior data. But from the point that you start now, or that the database went into effect, you certainly would have an accumulated dollar amount.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So Brian, you got go ahead, Don.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I just, since we're moving forward with this and proceeding to a fiscal note, I do see Director Noble and representative from the State Treasurer's Office in the waiting room, but particularly Ms. Huxtable. I want to ensure that the timing of this will work for the State Treasurer's Office budget reductions. So this would apply, as noted, to ad valorem taxes assessed on or after January 1, 2021. When will you be submitting your request for reimbursement to the State Treasurer on those properties?
Mr. Chairman, that is a very good point, because the fiscal year for the Veterans Program is from June 1st to June 1st, and we submit the request to the treasurers in by September 1st to get reimbursed for those. So from June 1st of 2020 to today, you have been having veterans apply for and get exemptions on their vehicles up to the $3,000. Most assessors have not set values, so the real property has not been applied yet. But for vehicles, there have been exemptions granted up to the $3,000 in this year that we're going to apply for a refund back or submit the forms back. So I don't know what the plan would be if you change this dollar made it effective January 1st. You would have some people that are going to get a claim of $3,000 and some that would be less. And then I don't know whether you go back and bill those people that got the $3,000 for the difference. I don't know how that would work. I don't think that's going to be very feasible.
So what's the easy solution to it?
Mr. Chairman, if you were to make the effective date line up with the program, then it would make some sense to us administratively that starting with June 1st, when we're starting the new year with the vehicles and working into the next year with the property, then the report would line up with your legislative change.
So June 1st, and then look for, but on the property tax exemptions, it's when you pay it. So yeah, so everything would be due by then. Well, except yeah, because so that would work. That work for you, Don?
Mr. Chairman, I think that works quite well for the program. I have not seen any concerns, but it's just my opinion that the state treasurer's office is going to have to come up with $5 million of cuts, or 500,000, excuse me, $500,000 of cuts, because these cuts apply to fiscal year 2022.
In order to meet the step 2, you mean?
Mr. Chairman, that's my fear, is that those reductions of about $1.6 million have been removed or will be removed if the budget bill is adopted from the treasurer's budget. If this applies to veterans exemptions that begin on July 1 of 2021, that would be a payment made in September of 2022, which would be outside of fiscal year 2022. So the treasurer's office would be potentially significantly short, but I would stand corrected.
Don?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and committee. This is Dawn Williams, Deputy State Treasurer, and you knew I had to raise my hand when Don said I was gonna have to come up with that money. So, Mr. Chairman, I am concerned that even going to just based on the previous fiscal note, that going to 2,400 is potentially not going to be enough for us to be able to cover the requests for reimbursement. And really, I respectfully disagree with my former boss. I would not be inclined to come up with $500,000 after having already taken a 20% hit to my operations budget. I would come to you, as I do every year, with an exception request for an effective immediate appropriation, because the statute does currently say in it, and it has not been contemplated to be changed, that we shall reimburse counties for those exemptions, not may. So we would in fact be back to you with a request for additional funding.
Well, and we don't have a problem with that. We could actually put it in this, Don, just so it's there. The question is, when will she need it?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I can probably answer that for you. So we make our payments in September. And so normally we come to you during a supplemental, a budget session to ask for an effective immediate appropriation. So we've made the yearly, the FY or the 2020 payment in September of 2020, which is our new fiscal year of 2021. So when we go to pay the counties then next September, we will not pay them. The normal pattern is that we will pay them as much as we can afford to pay them based on our appropriated funds. And then we'll come to you in the winter during the session, and we'll ask you for an effective immediate appropriation. And then we will disperse the remaining funds owed to the counties upon receipt of those funds.
So Don, my inclination is not to put the dollars in this bill, but put it in the budget somewhere now, or we can just stick it in their budget for a one-time amount.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Lloyd.
So a question I have, Dawn and Dawn, is in Dixie, Dawn and Dixie. So is this just a one-time hiccup as we get this implemented the first year, and I'm getting the nod yes, then on the amount that Mrs. Williams brought to our attention, the 2,400, may not be enough. Mrs. Williams, are you saying that going forward, or have we still missed the mark a little bit as you project out? Or because our intent is to meet the governor's expected cut. So we went from 2550 down to 25 or 24 as we now gain more information. Is it 23? What, help me there, please.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Larson, I'm just doing back of the envelope math based on the fiscal note, because technically, you know, we just write the check. We get the county submit to the Department of Revenue, they prepare a form and say, pay the bill. So based on that fiscal note, I just did, you know, it was going to reduce of the previous bill to 2,700. I just did, you know, I divided it by 300, divided every 300 or every 100 that you reduce, saved us 269,000. So mine is back of the envelope math. If Don is comfortable, Don is comfortable that 2,400 will get us within our new standard budget amount of 8.9 million, that's great. But I think that, I mean, just, it sounded like that 2,400, the exemption amount would get us to 1.6 million. And if my whole 20% budget reductions take effect, it's 2.1 million. So that's my concern. I don't understand that, the differential there.
So I want to make this simple. I want Don and Don to work out an answer, and where's the best place to pay for it, okay?
And
It's not a big deal.
I'm okay. I think what I'd really like to see, though, is I understand that maybe getting this implemented the first year might require a little bump. Yeah. But I don't want it to be, you know, moving forward that we've just missed the mark. And so, you know, let's get the number on what it would take for this thing to move forward, and then come back and, you know, chew on that bone on how much one time to get the transition made would be.
Yep, that's the plan.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, just to make sure I've understood what's happened, the change is to go from 3,000 to 2,400, but otherwise make no changes?
Yep.
Okay, I like that. Simple.
Yeah. Did you get your shot yet?
I did. I just did during our call. So
now you're supposed to hang out for 15 minutes?
That's right. I've actually, my 15-minute observation period has just expired. So they're trying to kick me out of the building right now.
Okay. Mark?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, isn't the other variable something that we have no control over, and that's how many people apply for this?
Yeah.
So that's one variable that we're not going to be able to control, I don't think. And so we'll do what we can, but.
Yeah.
But my understanding is that variable is not, the range hasn't been that crazed.
No, not since 2007.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's go home. It's after 6. I think everyone's got their marching orders. Is there anyone else that wants to talk, or attendees? Ryan?
Mr. Chairman, Director Noble is in the waiting room, but I don't see his hand up currently. He did have it up earlier, so I can bring him in if you wish, or.
Sure. Just see if he wants to say anything.
Great.
Hello, Dan.
Good afternoon, or good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I raised my hand earlier because you guys were talking about the 3-year statute of limitation, or the 3-year residency requirement. And I recognized that it was already in statute, so that's really all I had to say. And Dixie provided pretty much filled in all the other gaps. I think she did a great job.
Okay, great. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
So, Mr. Chairman, as we get ready to wind up, just some clarification. We got that, what was it? We got Senate File 50 on the agriculture COVID bill assigned to us. Is that just something that we'll look at as when we meet? Is that to put in place for when we come back in March, or is out?
So my understanding is that, and I'll talk with Drew tomorrow, is that that's going to be, all the COVID components of it are going to be given to us, and we'll end up having a committee meeting sometime next week and go through the options of the COVID relief and the responses and come up with whatever bills are necessary in order to implement, to carry on the prior ones that died in December, plus the new COVID laws and anything else that we as a joint committee can come up with.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, did you say next week?
Well, yeah, because we're gonna have to get started on it. We only got 3 weeks to do all this stuff.
Yeah, okay.
What
I
time-
just,
The day you're going skiing.
no, it's not about skiing. We set up the Teton County delegation all day on the 10th to meet with local government and stuff. So if you could not do it on the 10th, that would be helpful.
The 10th, that's a week from yesterday.
Yeah,
Okay. Wednesday.
yeah.
All right. Sounds good. Okay. Anything else?
Good job today, crew.
Absolutely.
This is a good crew.